Welcome to our Passover training session. This is for teachers, foot washing leader, and the music team. And before we begin, I'd like for you to go ahead and take out your Haggadah. This cup is for you, large group Christian Haggadah. And if you don't have one handy, go ahead and go to Amazon.com and you can download it there. You may have to type in my name for the search results to come up. And my name is Angela Owens. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. All right, just an overview as we progress through this presentation is that our Seder, expect for it to last approximately 1.5 hours to 1 hour and 45 minutes. And this time is going to include the meal. The overall tone of Passover is a happy, joyous occasion. When the feasts are laid out in Leviticus chapter 23, there's a total of 7 feasts. Only one of those feasts is actually a fast, and that is the Day of Atonement. So the rest of them you can cut loose and have fun with. Next, we're going to cover, do you want to read from the script, which you certainly, there has its pros and cons of doing both, or do you want to ad-lib? The Seder is a progressive meal that tells a story. So we're going to cover how, we start from, the standpoint of being a slave in Egypt to becoming a free person and, the symbolism that is conveyed with that. Passover uses object lessons to teach a message, and for anyone who is used to teaching children and children absolutely love object lessons, the Passover is full of them. This Haggadah uses English. Most of them are written in Hebrew, and we wanted to change that. We wanted to make it user-friendly for the church, but a few Hebrew words remain, and so we're going to go over those in the pronunciations. And then last but not least, we're going to go over some personal preferences and some helps, as you look to guide your congregation through Passover. All right. We're going to talk about timing first. If you're just doing a simple reading through the script, and this is just sitting down with, either your spouse or a reading partner, and just do a simple reading, it's only going to take 25 minutes. The meal portion we expect to last anywhere between 25 to 30 minutes. The foot washing should take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes, and this is usually not because the foot washing leader is taking a very long time talking. It usually is that extra time has been padded in there as children are washing their parents' feet, and it's a fun time as they are watching their parents get doused with cold water. The action portion, which is your object lessons, will take about 40 to 50 minutes. So that's kind of the bulk of where all this is at. But don't worry. By choosing to ad-lib, you can talk a lot of times while the action is being completed. This is not the case every time, but in many of the cases, it will help save you some time. And just in case you're wondering, where is most of the time going to be taken up during the Passover? Cups 1 and 2 are going to take most of the time. Cups 3 and 4, those seem to kind of go through very quickly. All right, so we're going to go over the object lesson portions first. And with each slide, you're going to notice that on the top right-hand side, we're going to post who is actually leading this action. So if you're writing a list as you're going along or making notes in your Haggadah, this will help you as you know which actions you're responsible for. All right, so for the Hametz hunt, that is the first object lesson that takes place, and I've estimated this to be 3 to 4 minutes. Typically, it would take much longer because children are usually going to a kitchen to go and find items that have leaven in it, but we're making that much easier with a large group Passover. We just don't have the time to be able to have this Hametz hut in a kitchen. So what we're going to be doing instead is placing items of leaven and as well as items that don't contain leaven in it into a basket on everybody's table. And children, as they're being seated, will have an opportunity to kind of dig through those items and find which items have the leaven in it. there's going to be a basket that's going to be placed next to the teachers, and there's going to be a reading coordinator and a children's coordinator, the one and the same. They're going to come up and call the children up for the chametz hunt, and she will have one of the children take that basket out of the congregation. All right, the next one is the mother leader. The lighting the candles here will take approximately 3 to 4 minutes, and this can also be thought of as a candle processional. What's going to happen is the mother leader is going to come and light the menorah candles. As she's doing that, one woman from every table is going to bring an unlit candle to the menorah to be lit. And these are just, mothers that are at each one of the tables. And if a mother is not present, then we'll have another female fill in her place. To make things go a little faster, we may suggest that women should start lining up as the mother leader starts talking, through her script. And then once all the women light their candles, the mother leader is going to recite a blessing. All right, next with teacher 2, we have the hand washing. This doesn't take very long, just about 1 to 2 minutes to get this portion done. And this is a real quick, dip your hands in the bowl here and dry it off and pass it down the table. Next is the carpus. This is with teacher 1, and let's see, that will take place on page 15. And a special note on this is you have the option of whether or not you want to use salt water or you want to use grape juice. Each one of them has a different lesson associated with it, and you can incorporate both of them if you wish, as far as to talk about. But as far as doing the demonstration, I would just use one. If you're using the salt water, it's going to represent tears of bondage in slavery. The script has substituted that with grape juice, and that is to represent the hyssop going into the blood of the lamb and being put on the doorpost of your home. With this case here, you'll also notice that teachers, they're going to demonstrate this, and as you're talking, you're going to need to prompt your table leaders to go ahead and start with their tables to go ahead and just pass, just start that action. There's nothing being passed at this point. All right, then teacher 1 continues on with breaking and hiding the matzah. This is actually called the afikomen. So now this one here has been mislabeled here. This should not be finding the afikomen, but this is actually hiding the afikomen. But with this breaking the matzah here, I've added in a little bit extra time because this is such an important point that, a teacher will want to elaborate on, especially if they're doing ad lib, because this is representing the body of Christ that has been broken and is being hidden away. And as the Seder progresses, that afikomen is going to be found again. So this is hidden by the youngest child. We have a youngest child already designated, and her name is Emma. And so she'll be playing several parts throughout the evening of, hiding things, finding things, and, and also with the 5 questions of Passover. All right, the next one is the plagues, and this takes place in the Megid. This is a very quick object lesson, and you'll find this on page 19 of your Haggadah. And what takes place here is as the plagues are being called out, each person places their finger into the dipping cup of grape juice, and they're flicking a drop for each plague as they're being called out. So there's a total of 10 plagues. That should not take very long. Next one is eating zafan, and this is technically maybe a portion of the afikomen, but what happens here is this is just eating a piece of the matzah, and that does not take very long, less than a minute to do. Next up, we have the maror. And this will take about 2 to 3 minutes. And the maror is your horseradish. And keep in mind that the horseradish is very hot. And so we've added just that little extra minute to do this because people are going to want to drink plenty of water after eating their maror with their matzah. Next up is the haroset. And this is actually the sweet piece of Passover for the object lessons. And this contains the mixture of apples, nuts, honey, and grape juice. And the haroset will be placed with the matzah and eaten together. And this will be found on page 23. And so that just demonstrates that we have, even though we are in slavery, we have a hope of a future with God. And so that's just representing that something that we have to look forward to. And, and also that life is a mixture of sometimes the bitter and the sweet. All right, after that, we get to the eating. Everybody by this time is definitely going to be hungry. And this will take about 25 to 35 minutes. And especially for doing this for a larger size group, I would suggest that the music team and the foot washing leader get in the food line first. And especially if you have somebody who is praying for the meal, definitely the teachers ought to get in there as well. This would be a good time as the meal portion is winding down for the music leader to come up and do a song or two. They don't need to have the full team with them at this point, maybe just a guitar and just to sing a song. And that gives the foot washing leader time to get prepared on the side stage and then come up and be ready to give his demonstration. All right, next up is the foot washing. This is a very laid-back presentation. Like I said, the kids absolutely love this time. And we've allowed 10 to 15 minutes for this. And, the foot washing leader will have about 1 or 2 volunteers up on stage with him. He only needs to wash one person's foot and then continue on with the story. If they feel more comfortable, your foot washing leader can just read, simply from John chapter 13 and get the script from there, or he can read the script that is prepared for him. But on page 24, there's several foot washing options just for him to look through and decide which one that he would like to do, and just make something, up that would be fun, as a presentation. And, another idea too is people, if they're taking a little bit longer, to do the foot washing, it is very much okay for the teachers to come up and, get back into the presentation of the Seder while everybody else is finishing up. Okay, the approximate timing for the afikomen, and this is where the afikomen is being redeemed. This is where the youngest goes and finds the afikomen, and she's coming back and to give this to the leader, and she is expecting a treat. So this is a good time for the leader to pull out, the chocolate coins or a Hershey Kiss and give that to her. And this will also prompt the table leaders from, all around, if they have children sitting at their table, that they're to give them a treat as well. This is also a time to, if you're going to spend time anywhere doing ad-libbing for teacher 2 here, this is the place, because this is, like I said, a key element throughout Passover is talking about, this is represents that Jesus resurrected from the dead. He is no longer hidden away. And just as kind of a thing to point out, too, with this is that the Jews to this day do not have a good explanation for this practice. They look at it as a way to keep the children entertained, but they do not have any messianic type of reference to this. All right, the last demonstration that takes place is with the opening of the door, and this is where we're going to invite the youngest child to go and open the door to let the spirit of Elijah come in. And this is the last thing that is really done. let's see here, that will be found on page 31 of your Haggadah. And this is really denoting the fact that, Jesus is going to come again. He's going to come again a second time. I'm not going to spend too much time on this portion because I think you can read through the script and kind of get an idea of what all of this means. But I'm going to also just kind of give you an idea too. On page 32, there is a responsive reading for the Hallel. And, it would be a good idea to just read over that. And I am kind of have a particular preference, I guess you could say, for the Tree of Life version that we use because it really brings out, the messianic wording here. So just go ahead and turn with me just real quickly to page 32 of your Haggadah. And in the middle it says, "The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. It is from Adonai. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that Adonai has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." And so you're getting that, that sense that you're kind of connecting this, this passage, with Jesus, who's been the one who's been rejected. But what makes it even more interesting is the verse right up before it. The men in that, that sentence says, "I give you thanks because you have answered me. You have become my salvation." But in the original, it would have said, in Hebrew, "You have become my Yeshua." So every year, Jews would read Psalm 118, and they would say, "You have become my Yeshua." And then immediately after that, they go into the fact that the builders rejected has become the capstone. So I think that that's a really good thing to point out. And as far as the responsive reading goes, you may want to have a women's leader come up, a men's leader come up, a children's leader come up to kind of lead you, the congregation, into that. And that's something that we haven't really figured for yet. It certainly could be led by teacher 1 and teacher 2. That would not be a problem. All right, after that, we go into a praise and worship time. This is what takes this from an educational element to a praise and worship time. And it really is coming full circle here. And making this into really a celebration of your salvation. And gets the congregation prepared for what is next. What feast does the Lord have next? Where does this go? All right, so next we're going to go into the pros and cons. Do you want to ad-lib or do you want to read from the script? Both of them have pros and cons associated with it. So ad-libbing, I believe it just sounds a little bit more natural. Actually, maybe a lot more natural if you're not reading from a script. Another benefit is you get to control the time spent. So if you've spent a little bit too much time in one area, perhaps you can spend a little bit less in the other and kind of make up for that, especially if you're watching the clock to see how much time is being spent. The caution with it is that you're going to need to prompt the action and the table leaders. To kind of give you an example here, just looking through the Haggadah. Like on page 15, at the very top, it says, "We will now wash our hands," symbolizing the desire that we have as God's children to come before Him with a pure heart and pure hands to be holy as He is holy. When you start out, "We will now wash our hands," that is the table leader's prompt to go ahead and start washing the hands. So if you are reading from the script, it's naturally going to prompt them. If you're ad-libbing, you're going to definitely need to make sure that you have the action prompts in what you're saying. Of course, the caution is that you could possibly spend maybe just a little bit too much time on your segment, and I don't know if you're going to feel like that's going to take away from the next teacher's segment or if you're just going to need to make it up elsewhere. And I do feel like if you are doing ad lib, you probably need to take into consideration to do maybe a little bit more study on the side, because it's going to take a little bit of mastery to know just what to say. And we're going to cover some of those areas at the very end of this presentation about some other things that you can study on the side. With going with the script, the pros is you have no worries about what to say. I mean, if you were to get sick and somebody had to come up and take your place, they could easily read from the script and you would be good to go. It does have the prompts for the actions, and for the table leaders, they're already built in. You don't need to have a ton of study time, to get the gist of what you're doing, because you're reading it. I do think that it may not come off as natural. It depends on your reading skills, about who you have up there. You just want to make certain that as you're going through this, that you know what actions are being taken place. Again, write some of the notes into your Haggadah if you're kind of wondering, okay, where do we go with this action? I do want to take a little bit of time out with you to pronounce some of the words. Like I said, we've tried to keep our Hebrew down to a minimum, but you're going to encounter some of these words. The first one is chametz. When you see a CH together, in Hebrew, it's going to sound kind of like a cat hawking up a hairball. So you're going to have a real guttural sound. So chametz. Next one is menorah. Then kiddush, karpas, matzah, matzot. And the matzah is singular, matzot is plural. Afikomen, Seder, maror. Think of a lion, like the roar of a lion, maror. TZ, when you see this in Hebrew, think of pizza, zafan. And here we have the CH again, so charoset, Hallel, Adonai. And this, little phrase is found in the Hallel, and it's Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. I'll say that one more time here. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. And the last one is Yahweh. All right, next we're going to get to personal preferences. This is the time for you to kind of get together, both of you as teachers, and discuss the personal preferences that you have, so that way you guys are on the same page. So I'm just going to focus in on teacher 1, because teacher 2 kind of takes off from teacher 1 here. So teacher 1, do I prefer a different Bible translation? We have used the Tree of Life version in this Haggadah, but if you feel more comfortable with NIV or King James, you'll just probably want to keep it uniform throughout, the entire, Seder. Do I prefer ad-libbing or reading from the script? And we've talked about that some, but, it's just good to know what each other has planned. While talking, I would like the other teacher to demonstrate and then select where. This especially is going to work for teacher number 2. So while teacher number 2 could be talking, teacher number 1 could possibly be holding up things like the karpas, the matzah, and so on. All right, on page 15, which do I prefer? And we talked about this a little bit. So are we going to use salt water, or are we going to use grape juice? The salt water is going to represent the tears and slavery. Grape juice is going to represent the blood of the lamb and the hyssop. And you can choose to talk about both topics, but ultimately you're going to need to pick one, for the object lesson, grape juice or salt water, because the team that is coming in to set up will need to know. Before the meal is served, who will pray over it? And that's a small issue to figure out, but it's probably good to know. And look at the responsive reading on page 32. And again, we kind of hit on that earlier, but do you want to have 3 leaders come up and be able to lead in that, or is that something that you would prefer to lead in? All right, this is just to get you, feeling it up to your best as you're presenting the Passover. And this is just some studying ahead of time, just in your own private time. It'd be good to go over some of these. And some of these we're going to be going over in our Sunday school class for the special sessions, and that's the last 2 weeks of March and the first week in April. Those are going to be taking place for the Sunday school hour, the second Sunday school hour in the sanctuary area. The first is going to be, I would recommend is the chametz, and that's just about how it represents sin. That's found on page 11. And, this is an excellent study. In fact, many Jewish families, they go to crazy extents just to get rid of any type of leaven in their home. This takes place about 30 days before Passover, and then it culminates with them selling their yeasty items to a neighbor and then buying that back because they don't want to have anything in the home. Now, we're not recommending that anybody goes and does this. However, there is a wonderful spiritual application to that, is that before we celebrate the feast, we want to look in our own lives and see what would be separating us from God. And in fact, this is a concept that you could still see today with the Lord's Supper. Next, we have Passover through the years. Believe it or not, Passover, the one that we are celebrating today, did not originally start out with the whole script. So we have the original Exodus, which of course had the blood of the lamb, it had the bitter herbs, the matzah, but it was a relatively simple affair. By the time that the exile comes around, things have changed. King David more than likely added songs during his time, in power. And then, but by the exile, now the temple is destroyed. How are they going to celebrate Passover with such a crisis as not even having a temple? Because you have to sacrifice the lamb at the temple. It can't be at just any spot. So with the exile, that's where we have the introduction of the 4 cups. And then Jesus comes on the stage, and Jesus changes Passover. He flips it up on its head because he is now saying that the bread represents his body, the wine represents his blood, and along with several other key elements here. Now, after the temple is destroyed in 70 A.D., now there is another crisis in Judaism. What do we do now? And we have to crush all messianic hopes, because Jesus, like I said, he changed everything. So one of the things that they did is they instituted, the roasted egg and the lamb bone. And some of these, it took a while to get into modern day Jewish Haggahs. Like the egg, was introduced around 1500 AD. Now the Hallel sandwich, which we do not have in our Passover, that would have been, right really before the time of Christ. But the reason that we don't have it in our Passover is because it kind of smacks a little bit of Phariseeism to, trying to eat the lamb and the herbs and all this stuff together, and when really that's not what God had intended, to eat it all together at one time. So I can explain that a little bit better in our Sunday school class. All right, the next item is the elements of the Seder plate. And so as you're reading through the Passover, you're going to see the different items. So we're going to have a cross that has taken the place of the lamb bone. Then you've got the maror, the haroset, and these items, all that you're seeing there, I would say get very well acquainted with what is actually on the plate. Next is the mystery of the afikomen. This makes a wonderful sermon presentation just all in of itself is the fact that, this piece of matzah, the middle piece that represents the sun, has been broken. It's hidden away and is later redeemed. And in many places they actually redeem it with, I think it's a 30 gold coins, which is candy gold coins. And this is within the Jewish tradition. So it's interesting to see that they had this object lesson in there, but of course it's just for the children to have fun. We know better. All right, changing the Megid, and this is the story of the Passover, and this is on page 18 through 21. And on page 18, you'll notice that there are 5 questions of Passover. Originally, there's just 4 questions of Passover. We have added the 5th because so many Christians are not familiar with Passover. And so we have added the last line that says, as a Christian believer, why do we celebrate a Jewish feast? And that's a really good question. It's a question that I think the kids are asking the parents, and the parents are probably asking the pastor. So very good to get into that one. All right, the next one is introducing Jesus in the new covenant, and that is on page 28. And this is definitely finding out where the Lord's Supper came from. So the Lord's Supper is just a small part of the Seder. And it's not a bad idea to figure out, why do we do the Lord's Supper? The Lord's Supper, from the best that we could tell, is that as disciples were, going out into, just different areas outside of Jerusalem, they would, they didn't want to demonstrate an entire Seder. That's an awful lot of work. But what they could do is talk about the Lord's Supper and then train people on how to do that. So it makes sense that they would do the Seder once a year, but the Lord's Supper can be done at any time, anywhere. So it's great that they can just pick up and do that with any kind of congregation that they go and celebrate that with. All right, next we have Passover, the past, the present, and the future tense. This is kind of a new concept probably for many people as they're sitting down and going through the Seder. You realize that you are celebrating, the past, that, that you are a sinner, that, Christ came and he died for your sins. And now you have the present to where you're having this meal with fellow believers. And then the future tense, he is coming again. The Lord's Supper is really a memorial event, but the Passover celebrates both past, present, and future. All right, then we get to the Hallel portion, which is the page 32, and that's for the responsive reading. And I think, I said I couldn't help but reading that and just feeling touched, being awed, as I'm reading that, because every year I get something new out of Passover, and I've been doing this now for over 20 years. But when I read this, talk about pricking the heart that they would read that every year, and they, to be so blind and not see all these signs, and the next is, how is it that we can make this a worship experience? And this really, again, like I said, every year kind of, I like, this is something that I got out of this. We have, every year that we have done a Passover, we do sing songs. But putting together the congregation and doing this, I think is going to have just that much of a bigger impact as we do an afterglow service. All right, so between now and Passover, this is just something that I would recommend to get prepared. Is one, just to read over the script. I don't really recommend that you read over the script in all one reading, but I would break it down into chunks and just kind of meditate over a section at a time. And then next, make plenty of notes. We want you to be able to feel like you can write in this and make this Haggadah your own. And probably one of the other biggies, become familiar with all of the actions. And we call them actions, but also you can call them object lessons. Become familiar with the ones that you're entrusted with, so that way you don't take away time trying to read what you're supposed to do and prompting your table leaders. Next up is we're going to have, like I said, special classes for Sunday school, and I would love for you to attend those. If you can't, all hope is not lost. We're going to put those up online, just like you're watching this presentation right now. We will have an online presentation for you to watch if you would like to, especially, it's nice to kind of rewind something and then, go back over it. Next is just to practice your timing. This is something that can just be done at home, and just use a stopwatch and, to see how much time you're taking in each area. This slideshow, if you need to go back over it or watch another slideshow presentation that we've done one for table leaders. And just because it was for table leaders doesn't mean that it's not for everybody else. Table leaders had a tendency to touch so many different areas. Likewise, I think that this will probably touch several different areas as well. And then if you can make the rehearsal on April the 14th, I would highly recommend that, because that's where we're going to go over the table placement with everybody, to kind of do the last minute, stuff, and then hopefully work out the kinks. If there are kinks, and there's lots of kinks, we do have a tentative day set up throughout, the week of Passover. But I don't expect that we're going to have any kinks. I expect that, things to progress, with everybody knowing what they're supposed to do. And last but not least, have fun. It's a joyous time. And if we somehow make a mistake during Passover, we're just going to keep on going. More than likely, not everybody's going to know what's going on. They're not going to have a Haggadah. So only you will know, if you have made a mistake. So with that, in closing, thank you for joining this presentation, and be sure to drop me a line, ask a question if you need to. Thanks.